everyone, but particularly with a focus on K-12 STEM education, as well as undergraduate and graduate education here at the University of Utah. And in the brief time that we've been in existence, we've established quite a few programs. We're currently supervising over 90 graduate students, and we're looking to take 50 more this summer. So we've got a lot going on in the center. Our main programming revolves around teacher training. So we do a couple of programs you can see on the slide up here. We have a program called MIST, which stands for the Masters of Science for Secondary School Teachers. This is a program for experienced teachers who have at least 3 years of teaching under their belt, and they want to come back to the university and get some more content under their belt. So they get a master's degree in science, which is very different than a master's degree in education. They focus their work on either biology, chemistry, or math, and then this summer we're starting a MIST program in neurosciences. And then they do a project which actually involves doing scientific research with the idea that teachers that know how to do research will be better teachers of scientific research as well. We also have a program called SMART, and that involves recruiting people who have extensive science and math backgrounds, who've been out in the field working in various industries, who've decided to come back and become K-12 teachers. So we put them through an intensive teacher licensure program over the course of a year, and we provide mentors and teaching experiences for them, and we support them for 5 years in the program until they can kind of carry on their own in the classroom. And so far that's been a very successful program. We're starting a Navajo Science and Culture workshop this fall, and it's an experiment. The idea is really to integrate math and science and Navajo history and culture. We'll be bringing 12 teachers from the Salt Lake City area down to Window Rock, Arizona, and having a math and science workshop with 12 teachers from the Mountain Reservation, and we have scientists and Navajo elders working together to, for example, we'll have an astronomy section where we'll be talking about what we see in the night sky, but then we'll also have a Navajo elder explain the stories that the Navajo culture has about the night sky. So it should be a really interesting endeavor. A couple of the other things that we do, we sponsor the Salt Lake Valley Regional Science and Engineering Fair. That's a huge event that's actually coming up on campus, I think next week or maybe the week after, and we need judges. We always need science fair judges. It's here on campus, and if you're interested, please go to the CSNU website that you can see right here in the middle. We have a program that brings physics to the Sudanese refugee community of Utah, and we are currently expanding that program to include more refugee communities, such as the Asian community as well. But that's a really great program that's just starting to take off, that the center is very proud of and very excited about. And one of the other big programs, our director, Dr. Nalini Nath Carney, who unfortunately is in Costa Rica today, or she'd be standing here instead of me. One of her flagship programs is called Sustainable Prisons. And Dr. Nath Carney, her passion is about bringing science and math to people who are otherwise disenfranchised. She goes into prisons, she teaches prisoners about ecology, she has them raising tree frogs, she has them growing mosses. They're actually doing ecological research in the prisons. In fact, she had a prisoner, when he was released from prison, go on to get his master's degree in ecology. So it's been a really great program. The prisons in Washington State, where she was working this program, have seen a reduction in what they call violent behavior of 30% since she started this program in their prisons. So these are just a few of the things that we're doing. We've got a number of projects going on. I really encourage everyone in this room to look up our website, to become involved. We're open to anyone. We'd like to serve as a resource for scientists who are looking for meaningful ways to engage educators and students. We're also looking for educators who want help with more science content. So we're really a coming together point for everyone. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Butch Atwood, who he gave me some words to introduce him that I'm not going to use. He's actually a really nice guy. But Butch came here as a chemistry education professor, and he's been a phenomenal contribution to the Center for Science and Math Education, and also to the Department of Chemistry. And he's going to introduce our speaker
last summer at a Gordon Research Conference in Davidson, North Carolina. I got to hear Sandra give a talk, and I was so impressed with it at that time that I thought for sure we had to get her out to Utah as quickly as we could. And today's lecture, by the way, is presented by a co-partner by the Center for Science and Math Education and the Ronald Eileen Ragsdale Endowment. Dr. McGuire received her BS degree magna cum laude from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She and I were talking this morning. I'm a native Mississippian, and we were discussing the fact that she was one of the 11 students who integrated a high school there in Baton Rouge. This would have been like in the 1960s, am I correct?
I was 2 at the time, if you're getting my age from that.
And she disliked it so much that she convinced the president of Southern University to let her in when she was 16, and so she graduated early from Southern University, went on to get her master's degree from Cornell and her PhD from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, where she received a Chancellor's Citation for exceptional professional promise. She's a professor of chemistry and the Assistant Chancellor for Learning, Teaching, and Retention at LSU. It's a small institution in the South, if y'all never heard of it. They play football there.
Occasionally. Yeah.
Not against Georgia, damn it. From 1999 to 2009, they were director of LSU. She was the director of LSU's Center for Academic Success. From 88 to 99, she was the acting director of the Center of Learning and Teaching and a senior lecturer in the Department of Chemistry at Cornell. And there she won the Clark Distinguished Teaching Award. In 2011, she was named a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and received the College Reading and Learning Association Distinguished Teaching Award. In 2010, she was named a Fellow of the American Chemical Society. And in 2007, she got invited to the White House, where she received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Math, and Engineering. Obviously a distinguished person that we have here with us today. I also happen to know that one of the things she's most proud of are her 2 kids, one of whom happens to be a professional opera singer and is in the Metropolitan Opera, if my memory serves me correct.
She'll be there soon.
So let's welcome Dr. McGuire.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks so much for coming. I'd like to thank Butch Atwood for inviting me and the Center for Science and Math Education and also the Ragsdale Endowment for providing the opportunity for me to come and talk with you this afternoon about something that is really near and dear to my heart, and that is how do we mentor today's students so that they will become very effective professionals. And so it's a small enough, intimate group that if I say anything that you have a question about or a comment, please feel free to stop me and engage me. I'm going to ask a few questions and I'll ask you to respond to some things. And so we're just going to have a discussion about effective mentoring of students today. And I'll see if this, that's working. And I do have some outcomes that I would like for us to get from our time together this afternoon. And one is I really want us to understand how structured academic mentoring is very important. We hear a lot about mentoring these days, and many times students are assigned a mentor, but many times the mentoring isn't structured. And if we have structured mentoring, then it makes a big difference. The role of metacognition, which we'll define and talk a little bit about, that in making mentoring sessions successful. And I want us to really be able to look at the characteristics of effective mentors versus mentors who are not effective, because very often we find that, especially in new situations, a mentor is assigned and not necessarily based on any kind of characteristics, but and many times these mentors don't actually, the relationship doesn't work. So we'll look at how we can define the characteristics of folks who are effective mentors versus those who aren't. And also, there is a definite role that the proteges, or we used to call them mentees, but there are people who said mentee is not a real word, so you can't use that word. But as of about a couple of years ago, mentee actually does show up in the dictionary, so anybody who uses that term is actually accurate. But what's the role of the protege, and how does a mentor actually communicate that to a protege? And then also, I want us to, when we leave here, have some strategies that will allow us to be effective mentors using things that have a lot of impact. And those are the outcomes. So I'm just going to turn this so that I can see it and not look up there. And so in terms of an overview, we're going to define mentors. We're going to talk about the role of metacognition in mentoring STEM students, and then looking at some of the actions of masterful versus misguided mentors, I call it, and then actions of proactive versus problematic proteges. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the barriers that might get in the way of effective mentoring relationships. And one of the primary ones is stereotype threat. So we'll talk about what that is. And then, again, looking at some effective mentoring strategies. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about something that you don't hear very much about, and that's self-mentoring. And I want to spend some time talking about that because a lot of times, especially I'd say within the past 10, 15 years, we have stressed so much the importance of having a mentor that I will see students who will say, well, I really wasn't successful. I needed a mentor, but I couldn't find a mentor, and so that's why I'm not successful. And so I think there's a way for us to teach students how to be their own mentors if there's not a mentor available. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up. But again, if you have questions, if you have comments at any point during the discussion, then please feel free to jump in. And so I want to start actually with the reflection question. And so I want to ask us to think back to as far back as you want to remember, and think of mentoring relationships. And if there was someone who was a particularly good academic mentor to you, and if that was the case, what were some of the characteristics or one or two characteristics of that person that made them an effective mentor? So take a few seconds to figure out and think back, and then share with us what you come up with. Okay, yes.
Built up my confidence.
He said built up confidence. And that is huge in terms of a mentoring relationship. And I talk about confidence a lot because before I got to LSU, I was working with a lot of students. As you heard, I worked at Cornell. But I really didn't pay a lot of attention to this role of confidence. It was kind of so in the back of my mind. But confidence is so huge. Anybody who's looked at the Olympics or any of the sporting events that are on TV, when they are interviewing the winning team, one of the words that comes up all the time is confidence. Well, we had a good practice last night. We came out very confident. Well, we were confident in our quarterback. And so I think in academia, we don't really look as much at the importance of confidence and building up students' confidence. And I think sometimes quite the opposite is true, that we think that if we challenge students and we want to stretch them, that that's going to make them better. But many times, I think we're missing the idea that confidence and doing things that will build their confidence is extremely important. So thank you. Anybody think of anything else? Okay, here and then there, yes.
Being backed up when you go off the curriculum map, when you follow your own curiosity.
Okay, yes. In other words, if you are along a path that you and the mentor have decided is a great path for you to undertake, and then all of a sudden you decide, as my younger daughter did, that even though you have a PhD in neuroscience and psychoacoustics from Oxford, you really want to be an opera singer. And so that's what you're talking about, right? Backing up that decision and not saying, are you out of your mind? What's wrong with you? Absolutely. Letting the protege make their own decisions and supporting them in that decision. Okay, and there was, yes?
Similar to that one, showed a very broad landscape of possibilities rather than just a single narrow path.
Okay, absolutely. Recognized that there are a lot of different paths that the protege could be very successful at. And so not having an idea that you have to pursue this particular avenue, but being aware of those different pathways that the protege can take. Yes?
This kind of goes along with that as well, but I think identifying the positive qualities that you do that
Okay, starting with the positives, absolutely. Even if you go into a mentoring session because you're having difficulty, but having the mentor start with, these are your strengths, these are your positives, which not only builds up confidence, but also builds up what we call self-efficacy, the idea that the protege knows that you have confidence in them to achieve what they want to achieve. Absolutely. Okay, we'll take a couple more. Yes? Say that again. Ah, yes, very, very good. They listen very well because very often people in a mentoring situation know that they're there to guide the protege to give advice, and very often they know exactly what they're going to recommend, and they're not listening very well. But someone who's able to listen very well and incorporate everything they hear into the mentoring session. Okay, and one more. Is there anybody else? Okay, well, all of those things I think are very good qualities. And I guess I would add one more, and that is to expect that the protege is going to have failure at some of the things that they're trying, and help them anticipate that failure will be down the road and prepare them for reacting to that. And letting them know at the front end that when that happens, they have not lost your confidence in them, and so all of those things together, absolutely. And so when we look at STEM disciplines, many times we say that, well, STEM, it's very hard, and we know that it's very hard. It requires a lot more effort and energy than many students are prepared to expend, because certainly when they come from high school, the students have done very well in STEM disciplines. Many times they have not studied, they've really not had to study a lot. And so it is extremely important to know that sometimes mentoring STEM students is different from mentoring other students. But if you're an effective STEM mentor, we do want to serve as role models for the students that we're mentoring, provide information about negotiating the academic environment. And we see very often that students might not be successful in higher education, not because they're not capable of being successful, but because they don't know some of the rules of the game. For example, that it's fine to drop a course. If you've signed up for too many classes, I have so many students who are in trouble, but they don't want to drop a course because they'll say, well, a W is going to look really bad on my transcript. But they don't have the perspective that, well, no, a W is going to look a whole lot better than an F, and then C's in the other courses that you could be making A's in if you've dropped this course. So really helping them to negotiate the environment, and also encouraging them to use academic resources. There's so many students who come to campus who may be undecided about what they want to do as a major. They may not even know that there is a career services unit on campus. Or many students now are coming to campus with learning disabilities. That had people recognize that we're having a lot more students. There was a research report that came out a few months ago about the increasing incidence of students who have ADHD or ADD, those kinds of things. And there are offices on campus who have professionals who can work with students in those areas. And so making sure that the proteges know that. And sometimes students just need someone to listen to them. Someone who can be a confidant, someone who understands what they're going through, someone that they don't have to worry about the information being disseminated. But let me give a caveat here, because it's also very important to let proteges know that certain types of information that you hear, you must pass it on. So if you know that someone is being abused, or if there's been some kind of activity going on that you are legally bound to pass on, then I think you have to let the protege know that if they give you that information, then you will have to pass it on. But things that are not of that nature, then we can hear it as a confidant and not pass it on.
Legal requirement of an informal relationship like that? I can see if I was a psychiatrist, but I can see good reasons for doing it, but is it illegal?
Okay, yes, and we have the definitive response here. Yes, tell us, please.
No, there's been some recent cases that show if a student subsequently gets in trouble and a person of responsibility within an institution of higher education has been aware of that and taken precautionary action. And Virginia Tech is the one that comes most recently to mind, where they got a substantial judgment against them for failing to have taken care of the shooter in that case.
Yeah, so if you know, for example, that a student is thinking of doing something that might harm him or herself or other people, then there is a requirement that you pass that on and contact someone else. And I guess in the Penn State case, we see the things that happened there. So, and actually, I'm so glad you asked that, because I don't know what the office is, but you guys can follow up. I'm sure there's an office on campus. Since the question is here, there are people who are not really familiar with those kinds of circumstances that require that information be passed on. So if you can make sure that that's disseminated. I see you shaking your head.
I just told Carrie.
Oh, okay. Got you. Right, the Dean of Students Office, exactly. Okay. And also knowing when to refer to other people. I have students who I can recognize that there is a psychological condition going on. It may be the onset of depression. And I am not a psychotherapist or a licensed professional counselor, and so I know that I have to get that student help. So there is a very, very strong need for mentors to understand the protege, but also recognize that there is a way to really analyze what the needs of individual proteges are. And this is the role of metacognition. How many people are familiar with that term? Okay, looks like about a quarter of the audience. It's a term that was coined by John Flavel in 1979. He's a cognitive scientist. And it basically refers to your ability to think about your own thinking. The way I explain it to students is it's as if you have a big brain outside your brain looking at what your brain is doing. And it is asking questions, has she thought of all the options of how to solve a particular problem? So it allows you to constantly be in problem-solving mode, which is very different than with many students today I think of as almost being in victim mentality. Well, I didn't know that there was going to be a test today, or I didn't know that we had to do this. But if you're using metacognition, then you are always in problem-solving mode. You always recognize that a situation is a problem that you can generate strategies to impact. And that's very, very different than thinking that you're powerless and don't have control over certain situations. It's not just your ability to monitor your mental processing, but also to control that processing and to accurately judge your level of learning. And I'll say a little bit more about the learning part in the talk tomorrow, but I'm going to confine my talk this afternoon to metacognition and the role of mentoring. And so if, as a mentor, we're using metacognition and recognizing that we're active problem solvers, and so there's always a question that we can address. And so in a mentoring situation, the question is going to be, how can I be the most effective mentor to this particular protege, recognizing that every student is different, and so the strategies that will work in one situation may not work in another situation. And so the kinds of things that we can put in place to understand individual proteges and see how one protege is different from another is to find out as much about the personal characteristics of this protege and have them find out these characteristics about themselves. And the first one is actually learning style. And I know that learning styles has come into, I won't say ill repute, but less than favorable looking at recently, because there's been some research that has said that there's really no scientific evidence that says that if a student knows their learning style, or if a faculty member knows the learning style of a student, that it makes any difference in the performance in class. I have read the study, and I think there were some problems with the way the study was conducted. At the Center for Academic Success at LSU, we have actually personally seen the impact of teaching students learning styles on their willingness to try certain strategies and to feel that this is going to make a difference. And actually, what I'll do now, let me just do a quick exercise with you. Let me just have everybody just clasp your hands together like this. Okay, and I'd like for you to look down and see which thumb is on top. Okay, so those of us with the right thumb on top, raise your hand, please. Okay, those of us with the left thumb on top, raise your hand, please. Okay, so it looked like about 50-50, right? Okay, so now what I want you to do is take the other thumb and put it on top. How's that feel? It feels very, very awkward. Yeah. Okay, now, but if I said, what you can do is interlace your fingers differently. Now, that feels a little better, doesn't it? Okay, but if you were to unclasp your hands and clasp them together, you're going to clasp them back the way they were the first time. And so to me, this is pretty analogous to learning styles. There is a preferred way that many people like to take in information, whether it's visually, whether it's read-write, whether it's oral. And if we know that, and if they know that, then we can teach them strategies to use if they're in a situation where the information is given in a form that's different from the way they want to take it in. It's kind of like, changing the interlacing of your fingers. But having students know what their learning style is, the modality, is important. And that's very easy to do on our website at the Center for Academic Success. It's just cas.lsu.edu, which I think I give a little bit later on. There's a very sort of quick and dirty way for students to determine modality. And what we found is that if a student finds out that they're a visual learner, and we talk about ways for them to come up with diagrams of what they have to learn, they actually will take the time to implement that strategy and will increase their learning. But if they don't know that, then they can't do that. Personality styles. How many people in here have taken a Myers-Briggs personality inventory? Okay. Oh, I'm impressed. A lot of people have. I can tell you that when I first went to LSU, the folks at my center told me, you need to take a personality inventory. I was so not interested in that. What does personality have to do with anything? But then they finally got me to take the Myers-Briggs, and for the longest time, the only thing I could remember was my scores were something similar to ESPN. But for those of you who don't know about it, just very quickly, it allows students to determine on 4 different scales whether they tend to be an extrovert or an introvert, whether they tend to be what it's called judgers or perceivers. And so some of the terminology is a little bit awkward, but just in a nutshell, it helps people understand whether they like to make decisions based on information they get from the environment or whether they like to intuitively make decisions. It tells people whether or not they're the kind of person who, if they have a task to do, if they want to just get that task done, they're very goal-oriented, or whether they're more process-oriented, so that they might spend more time thinking about how to go about this than the final task. And so it's very interesting information. When I finally did get into it and I started looking at other people and perceiving personality styles, it's very helpful information in explaining how people act. And again, on our website, there's a real quick test for that too. And then career goals and interests. And this is one of the biggest mismatches I've found with mentors and proteges in STEM disciplines, especially I've found at the graduate student level. And this was the case at Cornell University, it was the case at UT Knoxville, it's the case at LSU, where very often the faculty member knows that this is an outstanding student and they need to go into academia. But the student may decide that they really want to teach high school, they really want to go into industry, and this is really not what the mentor has in mind, and so they want to try to guide them into one direction. But I think we really have to understand what our proteges' career goals are, and then also, what do they expect from the mentoring experience? And I think so many of us go into mentoring situations with the idea that, well, of course this protege wants advice. They want me to guide them in terms of what's the best direction, when in many cases that's not what the protege wants at all. They want someone who will listen, want someone who will answer their questions, but they're fine with everything else. And so I think getting at the very beginning what the goals are of this relationship is extremely important. And then also, what's the protege's cultural background? Because the kinds of behaviors, the kind of expectations, many times will be very, very different depending on the cultural background. If it's a first-generation student, the expectations that the family has on what that student should be contributing back home. If it's a student who's Native American, if it's a student who's African American, many times that background is really going to impact the goals of the student, the behaviors of the student, and if we understand that, then it will make a big difference. And so if we look at now, how can I be, we're saying, how can I be the best mentor to this particular protege? So if we know as much as we possibly can about the protege. And then the next question is, well, as a mentor, what problem am I trying to answer? Well, the problem I'm trying to answer is how can I be the most effective mentor for this particular, oh, I'm going the wrong way, protege. Okay, and okay, so characteristics of a lot of today's students. Have you found that many of them are working more hours than before? And I know here you have a special situation because I guess after the first year, then many of your students go off and do mission work, I'm told. Okay, and then they come back or not, and I know you're trying to get the retention and graduation rates up, but even the ones who are not doing that, we find are having a lot more part-time work, they're doing a lot more. And the learning disabilities, again, there was this report that showed that more and more students have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and are needing special considerations. Have you found that? Yeah, kind of shake your head, yes or no? No? Okay, not really. It may not have hit here yet, but I can tell you it's on the way. Many students are just interested in obtaining credentials. Have you found that they're kind of here because they need the degree for their job, but not necessarily interested in taking full advantage of the learning situation? Grade expectations. Have you found that there's a lot of pressure? Yes. What do you mean I'm not getting an A? I was here every single day, and that should deserve at least a B. And a lot of them don't have time management skills because there are a lot more distractions for students today in terms of managing their time. What's one thing that they spend a lot of time on these days that many of us who are as experienced as I am didn't have to deal with back in our day? Exactly. Texting, okay, yes. Facebook, someone held up their smartphone, absolutely. You can spend so much time on that. And so many students really don't know how to manage their time. And so as effective mentors, then if we're able to help them with that, then that's very important. And then also, many of them have few learning skills. And I find that very often in an academic setting, even though proteges have a lot of different issues they're dealing with, many of them either impact their academic situation or they may be the direct result of the academic situation. Yes? Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Actually, I'm glad you asked that question because there was some research that I saw that came out about 4 months ago that said that the pace at which these images are projected on the screen is actually changing the brain, the neurological connections. And I don't know if you saw it, but it was suggesting that young kids should not be looking at TV because of the rapidity. And if the brain is in a mode where it needs this constant change in the picture or the stimulus to be engaged, then once they're in a situation where they don't have all that, then they're at a severe disadvantage. So you're absolutely right. And I think it's almost a catch-22 situation because the students who have ADHD, I remember I could watch TV, I'm telling my age now, but I could watch TV when there was only one picture on the screen. Anybody remember that? And now you watch TV, there's one image, there's a crawl along the bottom, there's a little box up here, there's something flashing here. And so the students who have ADHD, it's much more difficult to concentrate. And then you have these things, these YouTube and MTV videos where the image is changing every 3 seconds, which is exacerbating the problem. So absolutely. But I think that if we can give students information, give them information about this research, and then just suggest that they unplug for, even if they unplug for 20 minutes at a time or 40 minutes at a time, do some reflection, some deep thought. I find that these students can do this. It's not that they can't do it, but nobody's ever suggested that this is a way that will help you to be able to become more focused. Meditation is very good. That's been recommended a lot. But suggesting the kinds of things that students can do that will take them out of this pattern that things have to be more and more and more rapid. So thank you for suggesting that. I'm glad you asked that. And so if we look at why is it that many of our students don't know how to learn or how to study, and as I've talked with more of the graduate faculty, they're saying that they see these behaviors even in graduate students, but many times, as we said earlier, they really have not had to spend any time studying in high school. And there was a study by the Higher Education Research Institute. In 2010, about 2/3 of entering first-year students spent less than 6 hours doing any homework in 12th grade, but more than half of these students graduated from high school with an A average. And so it makes perfect sense that when they come to us here at the university, then the idea is that, well, I really shouldn't have to study because I can make A's without doing anything. And so basically, as mentors, I think one of the primary tasks is helping students learn how to learn. And what that means is that we've got to help them understand that learning is a process and not an activity that is engaged in the night before the exam. But when we understand why students have this attitude, it's perfectly understandable, because typically in high school, when I ask students in high school, typically, what did your teacher do the day before the test? What do you think they tell me? Review, exactly. Okay, so I expected that answer, but I was amazed by the answer to the next question, and that is, what did they do during the review? And what do you think they tell me? Who said that? Yes, okay, gave them the answers. Did somebody else over here say that? I was shocked when the first time I asked a group of LSU students, and they said, well, she gave us the answers to the test. One young man said, well, she gave us the answers, but she told us we couldn't write them down. And I would encourage you to ask your students, and it's pretty universal. Students at the University of New Haven told me the same thing, University of Washington. And so what's happening, I think, is that teachers, because of the high-stakes standardized testing, they are really thinking that if they go over the test before, give the students the answers, the students are really learning the process, and they'll remember it by the time they have to take these high-stakes tests. Because the teachers are very dedicated, very motivated, and so they're not just giving them this stuff because they don't want to work. I think they're really thinking that it's going to be beneficial to the student. But the net effect is that students think that if they, what do they always want from us before a test? Exactly, the sample exam. Give me the sample exam. It used to be, you're going to give me a review sheet. But now it's, I want more than a review sheet, I want a sample exam, and they learn what's on the sample exam, and that just doesn't work. And so we've got to teach them very specific learning strategies and encourage them and monitor the use of those strategies. And so just very briefly, I want to go over some strategies that might be helpful. And the reason I like to give these strategies, even when I'm doing talks about mentoring, is often the mentor will be the only person that this student is going to go to who has the opportunity to provide learning strategies for them. Many students are very hesitant to go to a faculty member. Have you noticed that many times the students who are most in need seem to be the ones that are least likely to come? Yeah, and there's actually, I think, very good reason for that. Many times these students have gone to office hours, but they have been berated, they have been made to feel dumb or stupid, and so they don't want to put themselves through that. So as a mentor, if we know what these strategies are, we could be very helpful. And so one of them is just a reading strategy. Anybody heard of SQ3R here? Okay, so now it's up to SQ5R, which is just a very simple reading strategy. So many of our students, graduate students included, are having a lot of difficulty reading information and getting the most out of what they read. But we found that just sharing this very simple reading strategy, before you start to read, survey the information. So you give your brain the big picture, and then come up with questions that you want the reading to answer for you. And then you do the reading, but just one paragraph at a time, stop and paraphrase that information to yourself. But if you do that, by the time you get to about the third paragraph, what you're going to find is your mind now is in the mode of, okay, she's going to stop, make me paraphrase this stuff, put it in my own words, and starts reading with the notion that it's got to paraphrase the information, so it focuses in a lot more on the information. And then after they've done the reading, then do a review and then write about it. It could be annotating the information in the margins. It could be writing a summary on cards, but doing some activity that allows them to write that information and then reflect on it. And in the STEM disciplines, one of the ways that they can reflect on what's in a textbook is just think about what are the topics that were in this passage that I found difficult to understand. What would have made it more, what would have made it easier for me to understand this? Or if it's in a non-STEM discipline reading, if you could get in the head of the author and ask questions like, how could the author have stated this differently? What kinds of scenes could they have presented? So just something that allows the student to know that they do have the ability to reflect on their own learning. And one of the biggest things that I found when I look at students who are not doing well and then they start doing very well, one of the strategies we teach them is to approach the information at the level that they are prepared to teach it themselves. Most students, when we ask students, what would you study harder for? A task where you've got to make an A on the test, or you have to teach the information to someone else. Which one do you think they tell us they would study harder for? Teach the information, exactly. And then we ask, up to this point, have you been in teach the information mode, or have you been in make an A on the test mode? And what mode have they been in? Make an A on the test. They don't even know that there's another mode that they can be in. And then we go on to explain that the good news is you don't have to have your own class to be in teach the information to someone else mode. If you've got empty chairs in your room, if you have stuffed animals, if you have imaginary friends. We have a vet school student who told us that she has the smartest dog in animal physiology on the planet, because after every lecture she would go and teach him the principles that she had learned that day. And of course we know that the benefit of that is if you think that you understand something totally but you really don't, if you start to explain it, you're going to get stuck. And when you get stuck, you go and you look that up. And when you look it up, it's going to jump off the page at you. It was there when you read it before, but you weren't specifically looking for that, so you didn't notice it. But this time it jumps off the page. And we have a lot of students who've told us that, including graduate students who are not doing well on cumulative exams, they said that when they changed their perception of what the task was, not making A's on the test, but being able to teach the information, that's really when their performance turned around. And then always solve problems without looking at examples. So many of our STEM students, when they're doing their homework, if they have a problem to do, they'll look at the problem, then flip back in the chapter to find an example of the problem that they have to work, not realizing that their brain is not working the problem if they're using the example. And so they really haven't thought about this before. They think that this is a pretty effective way of learning how to do their homework, of course, and learning how to do problems, but helping them understand that that would be a great way to do your homework if when you got to the test, the professor said, well, here's the exam, and here's a set of examples, like the questions on the test. But that doesn't happen, and so the only way to develop your ability to do problems is to do problems without looking at the example. Study the information first, and then when you get to an example, just read the example statement and work it yourself. And then use the study cycle, which I'll share with you in just a minute. And then study groups are really, really helpful. And a lot of times students don't participate in study groups because they say, well, you know, I like to study by myself. And I found particularly with underrepresented minority students, they are least likely to be inclined to participate in study groups because typically in high school, if they were in a study group, they were the ones doing all the work. and they were being distracted, so they think that they can work on their own. And so it's really important to have students working in groups, even if you do it in class. And Cindy, I'm going to out you now, but Cindy Burrows actually has a great strategy for, even in a large lecture class, having students work together in groups in class where they're discussing information, explaining it to each other. And if we can help students understand that this is very important, then that's very helpful. And any other effective learning strategies that anybody want to share with us that you found particularly helpful for STEM students? Okay, yes.
To announce at the beginning of class a problem that the class is then going to break into small groups and discuss, and come back the next day or at the end of the class with the proposed solution.
Excellent. At the beginning of class, propose a problem that the class is going to be broken into groups to solve, and then at the following class period, they're going to present those solutions that they've come up with. Yeah, and those are great tasks that will help students understand that they actually can do the thinking that's required in this course. Because again, so often they come to us expecting that we're going to tell them everything that they need to learn. They're going to go off and learn this, and this is what's going to be on the test. But giving them those kinds of open-ended questions and problems are extremely helpful. Yes?
It seemed to me that, I don't know this, but it would seem to me that another way of instilling the principles that are required of STEM students is to give practical problems that they can apply right away, and then they can see how their, let's say, theoretical education has significance.
Exactly, giving them problems that have relevance to their everyday activities, to their real-life activities. And that's a great point, because there are many students, again, especially from underrepresented backgrounds, who are being told that majoring in a STEM discipline is a very selfish decision, that it's not something that's going to help the community. And when I was at Cornell, there were Native American students who were told that, chemistry, how are you going to major in something that's destroying the environment when you need to be doing something that's going to build up the environment? I did a year on exchange at UC Berkeley, 68, 69, from Southern University in Baton Rouge. Talk about culture shock. But I had no idea that it was very unpopular to be an African-American chemistry major at Berkeley. I was told, how is that going to help the people? So you're expected to major in political science or sociology or psychology or something like that. And so I think giving students those practical problems that shows how what they're doing relates to everyday life, and even environmental kinds of problems that show that what we do in STEM can be used to solve problems instead of create problems is absolutely helpful. Is there one other? No. Okay, so we'll move on. And this study cycle that I mentioned earlier is a strategy that is very, very easy to be implemented. And it has to do with giving students a strategy with how to get the most out of their classes. Just a 5-step process where at the very beginning, they should preview the information that's going to be covered in class before they go to class. I was talking with a professor this morning, and typically what we advise students to do is read the material before you come to class. How many of us tell students to do that? Read before you come. Okay, how many of us have students who consistently are doing the reading before they come to class? Okay, a few people, very good, so I'm doing this. Yeah, and so if you don't have students who are consistently reading, and actually students have pretty good reasons for why they don't read before they come to class. Sometimes they say, well, I'm not going to understand the information, and I don't want to confuse myself. And so what we recommend instead is that they preview the information, because we know that if your brain has an overview, a big picture of information, and it starts learning details that go into that big picture, it's much easier to construct the accurate representation of the information than if it just starts out reading, getting the individual details, or in class getting individual details, and is trying to create that big picture. So we tell them preview before they go to class. And that means looking at the bold-faced print, the italicized words, any charts or graphs, and then come to class with questions that they expect the class lecture to answer. I had one professor, a physics professor at the University of Mississippi, who said that after he started recommending that his students do this, he found that the class discussion was much richer because people came to class much more aware of what was going to go on. Very different than when he told people to read before you go to class and nobody would read. Okay, then the second step is just go to class. Just go to class. Go to class. You have to go to class. And but many students don't realize that they have to go to class because now, in fact, what are some of the reasons that students think that they don't have to go to class? Exactly. Number one reason, I think, is the notes are posted online. So why do I need to go? The notes are all there. Well, we help them understand that if they've done their previewing, when they go to class, they can use that as a learning hour. And you're going to get so much more out of just reading notes on a sheet if you are actually there to hear the discussion. And so do the preview, go to class, and then as soon after class as possible, review what just happened. And the way we help students understand the importance of that is explain, in fact, I'll ask you guys, how many people here have ever seen a movie, any movie, more than one time? Okay, how many of us have recognized that we see things the second time around that you didn't even know were there the first time around? Okay, and students resonate with this, they understand this, and we tell them it's exactly the same with learning. If you review what happened in class as soon after class as possible, then your brain is going to see things that it didn't see when you were sitting in class, because it's not going to concentrate on those things that you understood. It now delves down to the next deepest level, and you will get even more from what happened in lecture. And then, of course, after that, you've got to do the intense study session. Just doing the 10 minutes before class and 10 minutes after is not going to result in learning, but you have to spend time doing intense study sessions, and then we even break that up for them, structure that, take a couple of minutes to set goals for what you want to accomplish, and then study with focus and action, turn off the cell phone, turn off YouTube, all those kinds of things. And then after you've studied, then you can take a break, call a friend, but only a friend who doesn't have issues, because if you call a friend with issues, you're not going to get off in 10 minutes. And so I recommend instead take a walk, eat a piece of fruit, then come back and review, and then do another one if you have time. And so what we recommend is that students try to do 2 or 3 of these during daylight hours, and then another 1 or 2 at night, and they will have studied 4 or 5 hours that day, which is so much more than most students study, because they tend to have it pile up and wait until the night before. And so what we find is that this very simple strategy is one that really students are willing to try, and we find that when they try it, it actually works. And so in the next few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about mindset. It's a concept that was reported on or developed by Carol Dweck, who's a cognitive psychologist outside of Stanford. And there's another book that was written in 2010, The Genius in All of Us, Why Everything you've been told about genetics, talent, and IQ is wrong. And these are kind of companion books. Has anybody read Mindset by Carol Dweck? Oh, okay, great. And so basically what Dweck has found is that most people have one of 2 ideas about intelligence. One is that intelligence is a fixed quantity. You are pretty much born with a certain amount of intelligence. It's primarily genetically determined. The environment has something to do with it, but it's more determined by genetics. And that if you, for example, had an IQ test in 3rd grade and you tested 70 in 3rd grade, then if you had another IQ test in 10th grade, you're not going to be 130. But the other mindset is that you grow your intelligence based on your actions. And so you could have an IQ of 70 in 3rd grade and 130 in 10th grade if you did those things that allowed you to learn and develop skills. And with the research in brain plasticity, we know that that's now actually a lot more accurate. And what she found was that mindset determines your reaction in a number of different categories. The first one had to do with challenges. People with a fixed intelligence mindset really tend to avoid any kind of challenge because they don't want to experience something that's going to suggest that they are less intelligent than they think themselves to be, because they think that it's a fixed quantity. And where we see this show up a lot in academia, believe it or not, is with honors students. And I know you have an honors program here with a lot of honors students. They are very resistant to typically, and I don't want to say, this is not everybody in this category has these characteristics, so I don't want to say that every honors student is like this, but in general we find that many honors students resist challenges. They tend to want us to prescribe exactly what it is we want, because they know then that they can do this and make an A. But if it's a task that is not strictly prescribed, then they tend to be less comfortable with that, because they don't want to do something that will indicate that they have less intelligence than they know they have. Whereas people with growth intelligence mentality see challenges as the way to get better. So they embrace challenges. They're not afraid of failure, because they know that failure will happen on the road to success. And then the next category is obstacles. People who have a fixed intelligence mentality typically they'll give up very easily, because their attitude is either I'm smart enough to do this or good enough to do this without putting in a lot of effort, or I'm just not good enough to do it at all. Anything that requires effort they see as fruitless, because why should I put out a lot of effort? With my level of intelligence, I shouldn't have to do that, and if I have to do it, then it's just too hard for me to do. Whereas folks with a growth intelligence mentality really see tasks requiring effort as this is the way you grow your ability to get better. Criticism, fixed intelligence mentality, do not want to hear criticism. When I was at Cornell, the hotel school actually called us in, because the students, hotel school at Cornell is one of the top in the world, and the faculty were giving students their written exams back, and the students' attitude was kind of, well, thank you for your personal opinion about my writing, but I know this is good writing, and if you don't see this, then this is probably your problem. And so they called us in to help students understand how to react to criticism. And then even success of others. People with a fixed intelligence mentality seem to think that there's only a finite amount of success out there. And the more successful you are, the less successful I can be. But if you have a growth intelligence mentality, you're actually inspired by the success of others. You know, if they can be successful, then I can too. And this is just a little diagram. Actually, I'm going to ask Butch, can we make this presentation available electronically? Okay, so you'll be able to have all of the slides, and you'll see this. And so finally, as I close, I just wanted to give you a little bit of the impact of using metacognitive strategies on student attitudes. And I think it's instructive for those of us who are trying to mentor, and it I think demonstrates the increase in confidence. This was from a student, one of my students who learned these strategies as a graduate student. He's now teaching at Xavier University. And so one of his students wrote him October 17th, "Hello, Dr. Kelly. I'm struggling at Xavier and I really want to succeed, but everything I've tried seems to end with a decent grade. And I'm hoping you can mentor me and guide me down the path that will help me realize my true potential." And so then 1 week later, so Al knows about metacognition and Bloom's taxonomy, which we'll talk a little bit about tomorrow, and metacognitive strategies. And so this is what he taught this guy. So a week later he writes, "Hey, Dr. Kelly," and you can already see the difference in tone. I made an 84 in my chemistry exam compared to 56 on my first one, using your method for 2 days without prior intense studying. Thanks for pointing me in the right direction. And then November 3rd, it's, "Hey, Dr. Kelly," exclamation point. "I've increased my bio exam grade from a 76% to a 91.5% using your system. My family and I are really grateful that you've taken time to get me back on track." And it shows that so many of our students, and again, first generation students, their parents and families are very invested in their success. They want them to be successful, and they are really distressed when they're not being successful, but they don't know how to help them be successful. And it's these strategies that can help them be successful. And so we've got to help students with time management, and there are a number of websites that do this, but even things like a weekly calendar, a semester calendar, helping students just develop a calendar of everything they've got to do for the whole semester, put in the exams, their social events. And I have to tell you, when I was at Cornell in the Learning Center, I didn't know the things that I talk about now. I've only been talking about this for about the last 8 years. But I had an associate director who taught, we called it study skills at the time, and she did time management. Even that phrase, time management, was nonsensical to me. How are you going to manage time? Time is time. She had these semester calendars, and we would have them at the beginning of every semester. And Cornell students by the droves would come to the center to get this semester calendar, just a blank calendar, but we had when the midterms were, and they would fill it out. And I remember thinking, why are these students thinking this is so helpful? It's just the dates of the semester. But it turns out that when they actually use this thing, put in all of their test dates, their quiz dates, when papers are due, and we tell them, post it either on the door in your apartment or someplace where you can see it. It really keeps them on track. The same thing with weekly planners, their cell phone timers. Anybody else have a very effective time management strategy you've taught students? Yes. Yes, Google Calendars, absolutely. And I am a self-described technophobic dinosaur, so I don't really use the Google Calendar, but I do use the calendar that comes with the Outlook calendar, and so I've found that to be helpful. And I think helping students reflect on, do they need something that's paper and pencil that they can post, or can they use both of them, but really having them reflect, so excellent. Anybody think of any other good time management strategies? Oh, yes.
We have a large number of married students here at the University of Utah, and so what I've told my students is, if you're married, there's only one period of time in the day that you're going to have a couple of hours to yourself. It's at 5 a.m.
Oh, okay. Okay, helping them understand when their available time is. Okay, great. And so mentors, just briefly, I can span the gamut from masterful to misguided, and just I'm sure all of us have gotten bad advice. Some of the masterful STEM mentors, and we've talked about these, so I won't go over all of them, you can read them, but really acting as a source of advice and not doing those things that are not giving useful feedback. Misguided mentors, controlling and manipulative. Have any of you seen mentors who are kind of like that? They know what they want the protege to do, and they want to guide them in that direction. Very self-centered. I was talking with a professor this afternoon who talked about that. Some are legends in their own mind. Don't respect the protege's intelligence and unwilling to remain on a professional level. But we as mentors have to understand that we and our proteges are very different people. And do unto others as you would have others do unto you may not apply here, because what you would want somebody to do to you may not be appropriate for your protege. It's important to listen more than talk. We've mentioned that before. Brainstorming solutions rather than giving prescriptive advice. Always communicating high expectations and dealing with setbacks, because they are going to come, and again, when to call in others. But those proteges that are proactive, they've got to demonstrate that they really want to receive advice. And so I think that has to happen early in the conversation. Receptive to constructive criticism. If I've had sometimes students who say, well, no, that's not going to work. Anything I suggest, no, that's not going to work. No, that's not going to work. And that's not very productive. They'll spend time preparing for the sessions and not afraid to ask these probing questions. The ones who are problematic will miss appointments, not call, and then think that there's no problem with missing appointments, won't heed your advice, won't take responsibility for anything, and want you as the mentor to spoon feed them to find out information that they could find out themselves, and pretty much unenthusiastic and negative. And we've already talked about the role of confidence, and that there's a strong connection between motivation, emotions, and learning. Because if somebody has a positive experience, then that motivates them to do things that will allow them to experience those positive feelings again, and then that will result in increased learning, which is increased success, and so it's kind of a very nice cycle. And then stereotype threat is just what happens to groups of people who are part of a group that's typically considered to be not successful in a particular area. So underrepresented minority students, women in science and engineering, probably males in nursing, but it definitely can have a negative impact on students. And so some of the things that have been found to reduce the impact of negative stereotype threat are always emphasizing the importance of strategies for success, and not that success is based on intelligence, and emphasizing membership in a group that's known to be successful rather than in a group that has a negative stereotype. And refraining from using language. Well, most students like you don't typically succeed in this area. Not that anybody here would do that, but that students have actually had that told to them. Effective strategies, we've talked about some of this, getting to know each other, the expectations and ground rules, remaining relentlessly pleasant and positive, and then setting goals and timelines, strong relationships. Really important to attribute failures to correctable causes and not to the ability of the protege, and attributing success also to the competence and not just to chance, and then consistent meetings, and then always celebrating success. And so very briefly, self-mentoring, teaching mentors proteges that they can use critical thinking to answer the questions that they might have for a mentor. They can identify people who've been successful, talk with those people, ask what strategies did you use to be successful. And many times people want a mentor to encourage them when they are depressed. Well, there's psychologists talk about this all the time, but self-talk. And so you can teach yourself to encourage yourself. Think about the times that you were successful and overcome barriers, and you can then make sure that what you are going to get from a mentor, you can try to provide yourself. And then finally, what I call the ABCs, attitude, behavior, and commitment. It's your attitude, not your aptitude, that determines your altitude, quote from Zig Ziglar. And I think all of us have seen many students who had a lot of potential, but they just weren't successful because their attitude was that I really shouldn't have to work hard, I'm very, very good. And we've seen students who had less potential who were very successful. And then behavior. The difference between knowing and doing is what determines success. And then finally, commitment. Our proteges have to know that even if people tell them there's no way you're going to be successful at this, that it's not over till it's over, and they are the ones who will determine that it's over. They may need to change strategies, but if they are determined to achieve their goal, then they will. And then I mentioned that I would give you some websites. That cas.lsu.edu is the one where you can get the learning styles diagnostics. There are also a lot of workshops on there, test anxiety, effective learning strategies, howtostudy.org. Talks about different courses and specific study strategies. Vark-Learn gives learning strategies information and other kinds of things. Some other references, I found the Bransford reference really, really helpful. And then some acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge Roel Hoffman, who is a master mentor and who worked with me on this. And the faculty in the chemistry departments that I've worked with, and especially Isaiah Warner. How many people here know Isaiah Warner? Okay, yeah, he is an analytical chemistry professor at LSU, and he has a mentoring program. I'll give some statistics about that program tomorrow. But also all the students who have used these strategies to great success, which really surprised me because I was not aware that just mentoring students to use effective learning strategies would make such a huge difference. And that's the end. Thank you very much for your attention and participation.